there are certain names that feel heavy when spoken aloud, names that seem to carry an echo. Project Montauk is one of them. It drifts through late-night conspiracy forums, buried military transcripts, and the whispers of those who swear they saw too much. To most, it's just a myth, a story built on paranoia and Cold War fear. But what if it wasn't? What if the tales of mind control, time rifts, and lost children weren't delusions, but fragments of something real, something still pulsing beneath the surface? The more you read, the more the line between rumor and evidence begins to blur. Files vanish, witnesses recant, yet the feeling remains that Montauk was never fully shut down. And to understand why this project still terrifies scientists and truth seekers alike, we need to go back to where the story began, on the far edge of Long Island, where the Atlantic wind turns sharp and the cliffs seem to swallow sound. There sits a place the government once swore didn't exist. Camp Hero. Officially, it was a coastal defense station, a relic from World War II, complete with bunkers, radar towers, and forgotten guard posts buried beneath years of ocean mist. The locals remember it as a sleepy military site, one that quietly shut down after the Cold War. But not everyone agrees that it is ever truly closed. Even today, strange stories ripple through Montauk's seaside air, of lights flickering when the wind is still, of humming that vibrates beneath the ground, of animals that won't go near the radar tower even though it hasn't turned in decades. Some visitors say their compasses spin wildly near its gates. Others, that cell service dies the moment you step past the rusted fence, as if the air itself refuses to carry signals. The official records are simple, almost too simple. The land was decommissioned, transferred, and finally turned into a state park. Yet, on certain nights, residents swear they can see faint movements among the abandoned structures, figures patrolling in perfect silence, wearing uniforms decades out of date. It's always dismissed as local folklore, but folklore doesn't leave fresh footprints on concrete sealed since 1981. Camp Hero's geography alone feels unnatural, a maze of hills and sealed tunnels that lead nowhere, or maybe everywhere. The entrances are welded shut, but people who've tried to pry them open describe a stale gust rushing out, like exhaled breath from something still alive below. Fishermen tell of low vibrations that travel through the cliffs, rising through the sand, making their boat compasses twitch. Even the seagulls, they say, avoid the radar dish, circling wide as if it radiates something far older than electricity. Then there are the stories that sound almost rehearsed, like warnings rather than myths. A pair of teenagers in the 1990s claimed to have sneaked inside one of the bunkers. They described metallic corridors stretching far deeper than any blueprint suggests, and rooms lined with panels that still hummed faintly, though no power source remained. When they fled, they noticed their watches had stopped, both frozen at the same second. Later, one of them tried to revisit the spot, but the path was gone, replaced by solid earth and wild grass, as if the base itself had shifted, rearranging its bones to hide the truth. On the surface, Camp Hero stands calm, a tourist attraction, a photo spot for families who don't notice the heavy quiet that lingers after sunset. The radar tower looms above it all, rusted but watchful, a relic pointing nowhere. Like an eye that refuses to close, every conspiracy has its prophet, someone who claims to have seen the truth and lived long enough to regret it. For Project Montauk, that man was Preston Nichols, a self-described electrical engineer, researcher, and the first person to step out of the shadows with a story too strange to ignore. In the early 1980s, Nichols began to publish what he called technical confessions. He spoke calmly, logically, almost scientifically, about frequencies that could bend thoughts, about machines that could open dimensions, about a base beneath Montauk where science and nightmare had become indistinguishable. His tone was never frantic. That's what made it unsettling. He didn't sound like a man telling a ghost story. He sounded like a man filing a report. According to Nichols, his work began in radio research, studying electromagnetic harmonics and frequency interference. But the deeper he went, the more he claimed the signals coming from Montauk weren't random noise. They were structured, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was transmitting from somewhere outside normal perception. That's when, he said, the government brought him in. What followed reads like science fiction written by someone who understood too much physics. Nichols described the Montauk chair, a device allegedly capable of amplifying psychic energy. Subjects would sit in it, their thoughts measured, intensified, and projected outward through electromagnetic waves. What they imagined, he said, could manifest at first as images on a monitor and later as objects in physical space. He called it psychotronic transduction. Others called it madness. Still, his descriptions had unnerving precision. Frequencies, wavelengths, modulation values, all too specific for casual invention. He even predicted certain electromagnetic anomalies in the Montauk region, patterns that later appeared in civilian monitoring data, power surges that followed no weather, no grid fluctuation, radio interference that pulsed like a heartbeat. When pressed for proof, Nichols never shouted. He would just smile faintly and say, "Proof isn't the problem. Memory is." He spoke of subjects whose minds had been erased, timelines that had folded in on themselves, and scientists, himself included, who remembered different versions of the same experiment. To some, it sounded like a psychological breakdown. To others, like a suppressed confession leaking through the cracks of time itself. And then there were his tapes, hundreds of hours of audio recordings, static, rhythmic pulses, and low human tones that wavered between frequencies. Audio engineers who analyzed them said the signals didn't match any known transmission format. A few claimed to hear voices hidden beneath the noise. One technician reportedly quit after playing a segment backward and hearing his own name whispered inside the static. Even skeptics admit one thing: Nichols never sought fame. He lived quietly, continued building devices in his garage, and never deviated from his story. He didn't ask to be believed, only heard. They called them subjects, but they were children. According to the accounts that surfaced years later, the Montauk project didn't just test machines, it tested minds that were still learning what fear meant. Many of the alleged participants had no memories of how they arrived there, only fragments that came back in flashes. Sterile white rooms, the scent of ozone, and the constant, low hum of electricity. Some described being told it was a summer science camp. Others recalled men in uniforms speaking softly but never giving names. There were needles, headsets, and glowing panels that pulsed whenever they were told to imagine. The children thought they were playing games, until the games started fighting back. Most of these stories surfaced decades later through hypnosis, therapy sessions, or the strange déjà vu that comes from remembering something you were never supposed to recall. A woman from New Jersey described a vivid dream of running down a metal hallway while an alarm blared behind her, a memory she dismissed until discovering that Camp Hero's interior blueprints matched the image from her nightmare exactly. Another man claimed he would wake up at night speaking strings of code, numbers and coordinates that led nowhere on any known map. Skeptics call it false memory, mass suggestion born from fear and folklore. Yet the consistency of the details unsettles even the rational. Every account mentions the same sound, a rhythmic humming, deep and mechanical, vibrating through the bones like a living pulse. They all describe the same smell too, burnt metal and salt water. And then there's the missing time. Many of the so-called Montauk boys claim entire years from their childhood are blank, not fuzzy, not forgotten, just gone. When pressed, their stories blur into something almost supernatural. Days that repeated, conversations that echoed before they were spoken, glimpses of themselves in places they hadn't yet been. One man described seeing his reflection move before he did. Another swore he met an older version of himself in one of the underground corridors, and that the man looked terrified. Psychologists have tried to frame these accounts as symptoms of shared trauma or collective fantasy. But what kind of fantasy leaves matching scars on people who have never met? A few even possess medical implants of unknown origin, small metallic nodules near the base of the skull, brushed off as surgical remnants, despite no records of such surgeries ever being performed. The emotional tone of these recollections isn't theatrical. It's quiet, confused, and sad. The voices tremble not from hysteria, but from the weight of something they almost wish wasn't real. You can hear it when they speak. A longing to forget, tangled with the impossible need to be believed. If their testimonies are delusion, they're heartbreakingly consistent. And if they're true, then the line between human experimentation and something else entirely has long since vanished. By the time Preston Nichols claimed the Montauk chair reached full operation, the experiments had already shifted from psychological to something far stranger, temporal. He called it Phase 7. To outsiders, it sounded like science fiction. To those inside, it was just another day of research that no one was supposed to remember. Nichols described it as an accident that turned intentional, a test meant to measure psychic projection that somehow opened a door. The air around the base began to distort during one of the sessions, the kind of distortion you'd expect near extreme heat, except the temperature dropped to near freezing. The walls rippled, instruments froze, and in the center of the room, where light should have fallen normally, space itself began to twist. At first, it was small, a shimmer, a vibration, a pulse in the air, like a heartbeat you could see. Then came the sound. Technicians later called it the mechanical scream, though no recording exists. They said it wasn't loud in the usual sense. It was inside the ears, like pressure collapsing in the skull. The phenomenon lasted 40 seconds before shutting down the entire power grid. But after that day, things inside Camp Hero were never the same. Clocks ran backwards for minutes at a time. Security footage looped segments that hadn't yet been filmed. A scientist monitoring radiation levels reported seeing his own shadow move before he did. Nichols believed they had torn a slit in the fabric of time. The tunnel, he called it. According to him, certain subjects could walk into it and emerge hours, sometimes days later. Others never came back. The few who did were often found wandering outside the base, disoriented, mumbling about the static sky and the endless hallway. One account described a test subject reappearing moments after vanishing. But when examined, his hair had gone completely white. His heartbeat was erratic, his skin burned as if exposed to radiation. And his internal clock, measured through circadian rhythm, suggested his body had experienced 17 years in less than 5 minutes. Witnesses said the tunnel was not empty darkness, but a corridor of light and shadow, flickering as if reality itself couldn't decide which frame to hold. The air shimmered like oil on water, stretching infinitely, yet folding back on itself. One technician recalled throwing a metal rod into the anomaly. It reappeared half-melted, humming softly, as if vibrating between two worlds. Then came the silence. The final recorded attempt, if Nichols's notes are to be believed, pushed the system too far. Generators overloaded. Magnetic fields collapsed in on themselves. The hum turned into a roar, and for a brief moment, the base vanished from radar entirely. Those who were outside said the sky bent inward like a dome being pulled down, and then everything stopped. The silence that followed was so complete it felt wrong, like sound had been erased rather than ended. When power was restored, the room was empty. Equipment was warped, metal fused as if it had been exposed to heat beyond measure, yet the air was ice cold. Some said a smell of iron lingered, faint but sharp, as if the atmosphere had been cut open and stitched back together. What they didn't realize until later was that the readings never returned to normal. Magnetic sensors near the radar tower still fluctuate at random intervals. Dogs refuse to go near the old bunker. And on some nights, radio operators still pick up faint distortions, a pulse pattern that doesn't match any known frequency. And when it finally closed, something had already crossed over. That's when Montauk stopped being a secret and became a legend. It was the summer of 2008 when the ocean delivered something back to Montauk. The creature washed ashore near Ditch Plains Beach, hairless, bloated, and unrecognizable. Photos surfaced online within hours, and the world christened it the Montauk Monster. Its skin was grey, stretched tight across oddly shaped limbs, its teeth long and uneven, its hands almost human. For most, it was the perfect internet mystery, a grotesque curiosity that made headlines for a week before fading into urban legend. But for those who knew the old stories about Camp Hero, it was more than coincidence. It was an echo. The official explanations came fast. Some said it was a raccoon, its fur stripped away by seawater. Others called it a hoax, a viral stunt. Yet the people who saw it in person swore it was something else. Its proportions didn't match any animal known to the area, and when local officials finally collected the carcass, it vanished before any official autopsy was released. Still, the photos remained, and the location, just a few miles from the sealed bunkers of the Montauk base, reignited every whisper that had ever circulated about biological experiments gone wrong. The connection was too tempting to ignore. Decades earlier, witnesses had spoken of hybrid tests, the merging of biology with electromagnetic energy, the manipulation of consciousness in living hosts. Nichols himself hinted that some experiments involved amplified life forms, creatures that existed halfway between physical and psychic states. So when something unnatural crawled out of the Atlantic, people didn't ask what it was, they asked why now. Fishermen who were on the water that week reported strange currents before the discovery. Their compasses flickered. The air felt heavier. One claimed he saw a light deep under the waves the night before, a soft, pulsing blue moving steadily toward the shore. A day later, the creature appeared. Within days, two of the locals who had handled the carcass stopped returning calls. One left town. The other, a lifeguard, reportedly told a friend that thing wasn't dead when it hit the beach. He refused to elaborate. The media moved on, labeling it a viral curiosity. But the image of that thing, the twisted face, the lifeless eyes, the wrongness of its shape, lingered in people's minds. It felt like a response, as if something buried beneath the base had grown tired of being ignored. For years, Project Montauk was dismissed as Cold War folklore, a ghost story told by conspiracy theorists and late-night radio callers. But then fragments began to surface. Not rumors, not second-hand stories, documents. Most were heavily redacted, stamped with code names that didn't exist in any official archive. Project Phoenix 2, Deep Wave, Omega Signal. Each page hinted at research that mirrored the old Montauk experiments. Mind amplification, temporal distortion, electromagnetic consciousness mapping, but dated decades after Camp Hero was supposedly shut down. The files appeared on obscure forums and encrypted leaks, always anonymously. Coordinates were blurred, signatures erased, but metadata revealed something strange. Several originated from government servers in Nevada, Colorado, and Long Island. One memo described continuation protocols for psychotronic frequency development. Another referenced the Montauk sequence, a term no agency has ever publicly defined. Then came the whistleblowers, not loud, not seeking fame, just quiet voices from the edges of classified work. One described test signals interfering with aviation radar off the Atlantic coast. Another claimed to have analyzed satellite readings showing faint energy surges near Montauk's radar tower, spikes identical to those recorded in the early 1980s. The anomalies followed no schedule. yet appeared precisely every 27 days, as if synchronized by an invisible clock. Satellite imagery added more weight. Aerial scans of Camp Hero revealed subtle ground shifts, small circular depressions near sealed bunkers that hadn't moved in decades. Local hikers mentioned hearing the hum again, that same low vibration underfoot, pulsing like a heartbeat beneath the sand. Officials dismissed it all. Natural magnetic fluctuation, they said. But the tone of those denials sounded too rehearsed, as though everyone had memorized the same answer. Researchers who tried to verify the leaks met with strange setbacks. Hard drives failed. Files vanished mid-download. Even archived web pages hosting the documents sometimes collapsed into white screens, displaying a single message: access revoked. Still, traces persisted. In 2017, a Freedom of Information request accidentally released an internal memo referencing non-linear cognition studies continuing under Phoenix framework. The document was recalled within 24 hours, replaced with an official correction. No records found, but the date stamp, the signature of its existence, remained on public record. To outsiders, these are coincidences, digital ghosts born from paranoia. But to those who have followed Montauk's trail for years, it feels like repetition. History looping through itself, wearing a new name each time. The same hum, the same secrecy, the same fear that something once buried has simply learned how to hide better. One investigator, who spent months tracking the coordinates, described it best. It's like chasing a signal that's always half a second ahead of you. Every time you think it's gone, you realize it's only waiting for you to catch up. As if Montauk's time loop never really closed, I just paused. For a project that supposedly ended decades ago, Montauk has a way of whispering back. In the past few years, strange patterns have begun to emerge again, subtle, almost ignorable at first. But for those who know what to listen for, they sound hauntingly familiar. It started with power surges. Entire blocks of Montauk would go dark for minutes at a time. No storms, no grid faults. The outages were precise, localized, and eerily rhythmic. Residents described the hum returning just before the lights flickered out, the same low vibration once reported near Camp Hero's radar tower. Utility companies blamed outdated infrastructure. Yet the timing of the surges matched solar patterns that made no scientific sense, as if the interference wasn't from above. But from beneath then came the dreams. Online forums began filling with posts from locals, all describing the same thing: a vast white room, humming machines, and a feeling of being observed. One woman claimed she'd never even heard of the Montauk project before dreaming she was plugged into a chair made of light. A fisherman wrote that after one of the outages, he dreamt of standing inside the radar tower, surrounded by echoes of voices speaking backward. It would have been dismissed as internet folklore, if not for what happened next. An independent group of amateur radio operators detected an odd repeating signal just off the Atlantic coast, a faint pulse in the 430 MHz band. Transmitting only between 3:12 and 3:17 a.m., it carried no known digital signature. When decoded, it revealed an irregular waveform, one eerily similar to recordings from Preston Nichols's old frequency experiments. Within weeks, online spectrograms began circulating, showing faint shapes in the signal, geometric patterns that seemed to shift slightly each night. Skeptics pointed to natural interference, atmospheric bounce, or even viral marketing. But the signals didn't stop. They spread. Similar pulses were soon reported in Arizona, Iceland, and Japan. Always the same tone, the same frequency band, the same 5-minute window. Journalists tried to trace the origin, but found nothing solid. The transmissions seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, bouncing across the ionosphere like a ghost refusing to settle. Meanwhile, locals swear the radar tower's hum has changed, slower, deeper, almost like a heartbeat. And when they record it, the sound never plays back the same way twice. But the strangest part, these signals didn't come from Montauk. They came from everywhere. Every legend hides a theory, and Montauk's most unsettling one isn't about machines or tunnels. It's about thought itself. Some researchers now believe the experiments weren't really about weapons or time travel at all. They were about consciousness, about testing whether human minds, when synchronized, could reshape physical reality. The premise sounds impossible, but it wasn't new. Ancient mystics spoke of shared visions, collective dreams, and the mind's power to bend the material world. Montauk, they say, was science's first attempt to quantify that myth, to prove that enough human intention focused together could tear open the boundaries of what we call real. Preston Nichols hinted at it long before he died. He claimed that the Montauk chair wasn't just a machine, it was a magnifier of thought. The stronger the mind, the greater the distortion. When multiple subjects were connected simultaneously, their consciousnesses began to overlap. Time, he said, became unstable not because of energy output, but because of agreement. Too many minds believing in one shared illusion at once. And that idea still terrifies physicists today. Because if reality behaves like a wave, collapsing only when observed, then what happens when thousands of observers focus on the same image, the same fear, the same memory? Perhaps that's what Montauk discovered. Not how to build a weapon, but how to think one into existence. The human mind, multiplied and mirrored, may have become the most dangerous force on Earth. Even now, strange experiments in global meditation and group intention have shown small but measurable effects on random number generators, weather patterns, and magnetic fields. Scientists dismiss them as statistical anomalies, yet they echo the same principle the Montauk researchers were chasing. That thought, when shared, might be the missing ingredient in physics. And maybe that's why the echoes haven't stopped. The hum in the tower, the recurring dreams, the signals that appear in unison across continents. What if they're not transmissions but reflections? The residue of a collective experiment that never truly ended? If minds could open portals, what happens when they all dream the same dream? Maybe Project Montauk was never shut down. Maybe it's inside all of us. Today, Camp Hero is just another stop on the map. Families picnic on the grass. Cyclists trace the coastal trail. Children laugh where soldiers once guarded the shore. On paper, it's a park, a quiet place reclaimed by salt air and time. Yet those who linger until dusk say the silence here feels heavier than it should, as if the ground itself is holding its breath. The radar tower still stands, skeletal and defiant, pointing toward an indifferent sky. Its metal hums faintly when the wind changes, a low vibration that locals insist is just the ocean breeze. But sometimes when the night is windless, the sound continues. Deep, rhythmic, almost mechanical, like something buried far below, still turning. Tourists take photos, unaware they're standing above sealed corridors and welded doors. The concrete slabs scattered across the cliffs aren't ruins, they're lids. Beneath them, the tunnels still wind through the bedrock, untouched, unlit. Engineers who surveyed the land in the early 2000s reported magnetic interference whenever their instruments approached those sections. A few even mentioned hearing whispers through the metal. Not words exactly, but pressure changes that carried tone, like breath pressing against steel. Some say the project's energy never fully dissipated, that it's woven into the rock, still looping through invisible circuits beneath Montauk's soil. The air tastes different here. Metallic, charged, like a memory you can feel against your skin. Every few years, someone comes forward with a story. A camper who woke up to find the tower's shadow moving against the moonlight. A park ranger who swore he heard footsteps pacing behind a locked bunker door. One visitor claimed that when he leaned close to the concrete, he heard a heartbeat. Slow, steady, waiting. It's easy to dismiss these tales, until you realize how familiar they sound. They echo the same patterns, the same phenomena, as if whatever started beneath Montauk simply adapted to survive. Not in machines or experiments, but in recollection. Because places remember things people try to forget. The steel remembers the hum. The walls remember the screams. The air remembers the tremor of something crossing over. And when the night grows still enough, it's as if the memories rise again, like static clinging to the dark. Walk too far from the main path, and you'll feel it. That subtle vibration beneath your feet, steady and alive. A faint reminder that legends don't end. They wait. Maybe that's why locals lower their voices when they speak the project's name. Maybe that's why even decades later, the stories persist. Not to prove what happened, but to warn that some doors, once opened, never really close. Some names shouldn't be mentioned. And if you ever find yourself standing under the radar tower at night, when the sea is calm and the stars hang motionless above the black water, listen closely. You might hear it too, the faint hum of memory still alive beneath the earth, because Montauk never forgot. And maybe neither have we. By day, Camp Hero feels harmless, a slice of seaside calm where the wind smells like salt and the waves erase every sound that dares to linger. Families wander the trails, snapping photos of the old radar tower rising like a monument to forgotten wars. Children climb over the cracked concrete slabs that once led to bunkers, unaware that the ground beneath them is hollow, a maze of sealed corridors, locked doors, and tunnels that haven't felt sunlight in half a century. They say everything down there was emptied long ago, that the machines were dismantled and the research erased. But there's a kind of silence here that doesn't feel empty. It feels charged. The kind of silence that hums just below the edge of hearing, like a memory replaying itself over and over, refusing to fade. When the sun dips below the cliffs, the air changes. The seagulls vanish. The wind grows heavy, and that faint hum, the one dismissed as the sound of old metal contracting in the cold, begins to rise, low, rhythmic, alive. Some say it comes from the radar dish, still rusted in place, its machinery long dead, yet somehow moving when the moon hits it just right. Others swear it comes from the ground itself, from something still turning below, something that never stopped. Tourists laugh when locals tell stories. They say the power grid is unstable, that wind carries sound in strange ways. But those who stay past midnight describe different things. Static in their radios, cameras shutting off without warning. A sense of being watched, not by a person, but by the place. One night, a hiker claimed he saw lights flickering beneath the sand, like faint lightning caught in the earth. Another said he felt a vibration underfoot, pulsing like a slow heartbeat. When he knelt to listen, the ground was warm. No one can prove,